So last example. And this example will actually tie in with a lot of other things we'll talk about tomorrow. In Boston, there's a harbor in Boston. And my friend was having a go-away party. And I was actually in town. This is a couple years ago. I'd been traveling. And my friend was having a go-away party. I was in town for just like 3 days. I was leaving. His go-away party was at the bar on the harbor, like 10 to 2. My flight was at like 6, so I had to go to the airport at 4. So it was like literally I was just going to go out and party and then go straight to the airport. Well, I meet this girl. I'm at this party, and there's this really hot girl sitting at a table with a couple of her friends. So I see her looking at me, and I go over, and I move over by her, and I talk to her. I say, "Hey, what's up? My name's Mark. You're really cute. I saw you looking at me." And I said, "Yeah, I wanted to come and talk to you." And she kind of laughed. And her and her friend like kind of gave each other like this like sassy look, like. And she said, "What if you don't like talking to me?" And I was like, "I'll go talk to somebody else." And she looked at me and she's like, "It's a good answer. It's a really good answer." I'm like, "Okay, thank you." And so I sit down and I start talking with her, and it's just from the get-go, it's very sexual. And I start asking her, where she's from, where she lives. She lives way outside of town. And flirting with her a little bit. And I'm like, "You know what? I have to leave town in like 4 hours." And she's like, "Oh, okay." I'm like, "But I'd like to have sex with you before then." She's like, "What?" I'm like, "I'm leaving in 4 hours, but I'd like to sleep with you before I go." And she's like, "Okay. Do you have a hotel?" I said, "No, I don't." And she's like, "Okay. That's very forward of you." And I was like, "Yeah, that's how I roll." And so the night goes along, and it's basically one of those things. The fact that she's still there it's an implicit yes. So I'm like, "Yeah, we'll figure it out, whatever." So we keep drinking, hanging out. Actually, at one point, one of my friends comes over, and he starts, because he knew I was leaving, so he starts flirting with her. And I'm just sitting there sipping my drink and like letting him flirt or whatever. And he's like, "So, what are you guys doing later?" And she just looks at him. She's like, "We've decided to have sex." And he's like, "All right, I'll leave you two alone then." And he like walks off. And so finally, like the bar closes, and she's like, "All right, so what now?" And the way the harbor's built, there's a bunch of like hotels and big buildings out on the harbor. But there's these, I don't even know what you call them. I don't know anything about boats, but these things that go way out into the harbor. And on the end, there's like tents out there. And so I'm like, I don't know, let's just go walk along the harbor. Let's see what happens. And so I just take her out to one of these tents. And, it's like covered, and it's a beautiful night. It's a summer night. And we start kissing, and then like just start taking the clothes off. And we actually ended up having sex on the Boston Harbor with planes landing over our heads while we're going at it. It was awesome. It was really fucking cool. And the beautiful thing is that not only does behavioral vulnerability imply confidence and status, but simply the act of asserting your sexuality shamelessly, of putting yourself out there, is a turn on. As we'll see tomorrow, the key to sexual tension is creating uncertainty. And so when you say, "You're really hot, I want to have sex with you," ironically, it creates a lot of uncertainty because you don't know how it's going to happen, you don't know where it's going to happen. All you know is that you want to do it. That boldness, that demonstration of interest, that comfort expressing yourself sexually implies all these good characteristics, all these good traits, and it's actually a turn on. It generates sexual tension. It generates passion. And so situations like these where you're that forward and that direct actually results in some of the craziest sex that I've ever had. And that's what blew my mind the most about this stuff. I could see very early on, yeah, create these nice intimate connections, have these great, passionate moments and all this stuff. But when I found the right girls who were just kind of like a little bit crazy, a little bit kinky, and I was just like, let's do it. Let's do it out here. Let's do it right now. Like, it's a turn on. It's a turn on on every level. It's a turn on an emotional level. It's a turn on a sexual level. And it's also attractive on a social level. We all appreciate people who are authentic. We all appreciate being around people who are authentic. We're also sexually turned on by sexual authenticity, by honest expressions of sexual desire, both men and women. And then authentic emotional expressions create emotional intimacy. So every level of interaction, it's a turn on. So just to review, why vulnerability works. So one, it implies status equality. Remember the inferiority gap, right? She's here, you're here. Well, when you're vulnerable, when you're willing to show your faults, when you're willing to put your desires out there without looking for anything in return, suddenly, you're here. It implies an equality. It implies you're on the same level. Two, rewires anxiety. Remember how we talked about how performance just multiplies anxiety, creates more anxiety? Vulnerability builds new behavioral patterns on top of anxiety. So for instance, if I'm very anxious about, or it's like the alcoholic guy. He's very anxious about his past, the problems in his past, generates a lot of anxiety with him, causes him to perform, be inauthentic on his dates, he ends up not dating the women anymore. Suddenly he's vulnerable and open about it, and yeah, it's really painful and difficult in the moment, but then once he gets comfortable with it, the anxiety is handled. Vulnerability is a long-term solution. You never have to remember what you're talking about. You never have to remember what you lied about or exaggerated about. You don't have to sit there and think about, well, if she said this, then she means this. And if she thinks that I think this about her, then that means I should say this so that she'll think that I think this. You never have to, that all goes away. That all stops. You don't have to worry about it anymore. It becomes easier. It becomes freer and easier. Generates sexual tension when you express your sexuality. And it generates intimacy when you express your emotions. And then finally, it attracts the compatible women into your life. And actually, compatibility is what we'll be talking about quite a bit tomorrow. Compatibility, demographics. So yeah, that's a lot of advantages. There are a couple mistakes that guys make with vulnerability. The one that you mentioned, which is, okay, if we're supposed to be honest, we're supposed to be vulnerable, doesn't that mean we should just walk around and tell every hot girl, like, oh, I want to fuck you, I want to fuck you, I want to fuck you, I want to fuck you? You can do that. And sure, it might work every once in a while. But remember, where is it? Trying to meet hers and our needs, right? So, the girl in the harbor, it works, because as I was talking to her, I could tell, I could tell she was really into me. Physically, mostly. I mean, she had been checking me out, and we had like done an eye contact thing. And then when I sat down and started talking to her, I could tell that she was kind of a wild party girl. And just the way our interaction was going, the fact that I was leaving tomorrow, it's like, might as well just push for this. So, you can express yourself authentically no matter what. But the thing is most of us don't just want sex. Like, you can walk around and say, I want to fuck this girl, I want to fuck this girl, I want to fuck this girl. But the thing is that's muddying up your self-perception. Because we all have far more desires than just fucking. We all have desires for intimacy, we all have desires to feel important, we all have desires to feel sexy, have somebody to talk to. And the thing is we don't know which girl is going to provide each of those needs. And so if you walk around and approach women just saying, I want to fuck you, you're limiting her. You're objectifying her, which is something we're going to get into tomorrow. So, on the one hand, just saying I want to fuck you does not represent all of your needs or desires. Therefore, it's not completely authentic. And B, it objectifies the women you're talking to and objectifies the relationship. And so, therefore, it's a narcissistic behavior. The other problem the analogous problem that some guys have, and this one's actually much more common, it's something I call emotional vomit. A lot of guys, a big mistake a lot of guys make with the vulnerability thing is they learn about it, they read about it, they get really excited about it, and then they go on a date with the girl and they just start spewing like all of their like insecurities and emotions and life story and all this stuff out, and the girl kind of freaks out and is like, okay, bye, like ignoring it. And then they email me and they're like, dude, I talked about my dog dying and how my dad hates me and I didn't get laid. What the fuck? And that's not vulnerability. Remember, if it's conditional, it's not vulnerability. If there's something that you lack in your own emotional awareness, then it's not completely authentic. And what actually is required to happen sometimes is a lot of times guys have to go through a lot of uncomfortable exposures of their emotions before you get to the comfortable part. In my book, I refer to this as the pain period. So the example of me sitting on the bed with the girl and just going off about my ex was emotional vomit, and it was part of my pain period. I had to go through that, and I had to lose that girl to get to the point where I became comfortable with that aspect of myself. The same thing kind of happens with sexuality. So I went through a period, and a lot of guys go through a period, where I used to say like really offensive and disgusting things to random girls on the street and in bars, and you could classify that as a sexual vomit, I guess, where it was a necessary step, for me at least, it was a necessary step I had to take to become comfortable with my sexuality, because I wasn't comfortable just expressing it in a serious way. I wasn't comfortable expressing, just telling a girl, like, you're very beautiful, I'd like to go out with you sometime. I had to make a joke out of it. I had to make it extreme. I had to make it degrading and objectifying. Does all that make sense? It's a complex topic, but it's important. I mean, this is like the cornerstone of everything. So, the other mistake guys make with vulnerability, and I kind of referred to it a little bit earlier, is again, they look at it as a technique. Like I said, I get emails, they're like, oh, I talked about how my mom's a bitch and she doesn't like me. It didn't work. It didn't work. That's always like, whenever, if you ever catch yourself saying that didn't work, you're performing. Anytime you ever think that to yourself, say that to somebody, hear somebody say it, if you ever say that didn't work, you're performing. So let's wrap up with a little bit of process here. The vulnerability process. And how do we become vulnerable? How do we practice this? What does it look like? So the first thing to know is a catchy phrase that I like. It's acceptance leads to action. So the first thing that needs to happen, and this ties in with all of the defense mechanism stuff, is that whatever you're insecure about, whatever you see as your flaws, whatever you see as something that you're uncomfortable with or that you're ashamed about, you have to accept that. You have to accept that anxiety. You have to accept that shame. You have to accept that insecurity. You have to say, yes, I am insecure. I feel like I need to have a big house or a nice boat or a bunch of hot girls next to me. I feel like I need, in this moment, I feel like I need that. Once you accept that, then you can move beyond it. But if you ever try to fight against that, or fight through it, you just reinforce it. So step one of vulnerability is acceptance. You accept that part of yourself and you decide, you say, if a woman rejects me or does not like me because of this, that is her problem and not mine. It's not until you accept these things that you can actually move forward. The most obvious example of this is with the approach anxiety stuff. A lot, for many years, I mean, even when I was able to approach, I still used to get so anxious. I used to be like, this is ridiculous. I've been doing this for years. I've approached over 1,000 women probably. Why am I still anxious? Why do I still feel like this? And it kept getting, it was just bad all the time. And then finally, around 2009, 2010, I just decided, you know what, fuck it. I'm an anxious guy. I have social anxiety. This is just how I'm wired. This is how I'm going to be. And it was funny because then I started going out and it was like, the anxiety would come, but I didn't really care. It's like, oh yeah, it's the anxiety again. And I was able to act much easier. I wasn't judging myself. I wasn't like, God, I'm such a nervous wreck again. I need to drink. I need to do warm-up sets. I need to do this. Just show up, do it. Yeah, I'm nervous. Okay, that's fine. So step two is action. Of course, we all hate the advice, just do it anyway. So when it comes time to perform the action of vulnerability, one of three things happens. A, you chicken out, which most of the time, this is what most of us do. If you chicken out, don't judge yourself. Remember, acceptance. And chunk the behavior down. And this is something we'll get into more detail about tomorrow. But chunking down is basically take a larger behavior and make it smaller, break it into smaller parts, and then start with the smallest part. So for instance, if you're terrified of approaching, one way you could chunk approaching down is say, okay, I'm just going to find a cute girl and ask her what time it is. Or I'm going to find a cute girl and ask her directions to a restaurant that I know know how to get to. And you do that until you feel comfortable doing that, and then you add the behavior of trying to hit on her. That will make it easier, and then maybe you won't chicken out next time. Second result that comes from action, from vulnerability, awkwardness is actually really easy to deal with. A lot of guys are terrified. They're like, oh, I don't want it to be awkward. I don't want it to be weird. Awkwardness is fine. If it gets awkward, acknowledge it. As soon as you acknowledge awkwardness, it disappears. And not only does it disappear, but a lot of times, people will laugh about it. I remember there was one time I was on a date, and I went in to kiss a girl, but we did one of these things where like, I turned my head this way and she turned her head this way, and then so she adjusted and turned back and I adjusted and turned back, and so we like did this thing for a few seconds, and then we just kind of pulled away and stared at each other. It was like really, really awkward. And I was just like, that was awkward. And she just started laughing. She's like, yeah, it was really awkward. I was like, okay, you go this way, I'll go this way. And she's like, okay. And like, but if you sit there and dwell on it, you're like, oh my God, I fucked the kiss up. Oh, it's not gonna work. Like, it just makes it worse. Acknowledge it, accept it, do it again. And then finally, third result is it goes okay. And when you continually repeat this process, as time goes on, it's going to be okay more and more and more and more, to the point where it's just going to always be okay.